Good morning again.
Good morning.
That is pretty much the perfect introduction to our message today. Who is Yahweh? Now, this is the question that's been confronting us every week since the beginning of our study here in Exodus. And it would seem that every step along the way, Yahweh is provoking this question from everybody around and from us who are following along. Who is Yahweh? You know, it's interesting. We have finally arrived at the story of the plagues. Often when we think about the book of Exodus, what we think about is the 10 plagues, right? Here we are, 10 messages. Actually, this is our 11th message into the series, and we're only just now getting to the 10 plagues. There's been a lot to discover along the way, and in our discovering, the main thing that we are learning is, who is Yahweh? As we begin the plagues, I wonder, have you ever wondered why 10 plagues? Has it ever popped in your mind? Wouldn't 4 or 5 plagues have done the job? You know, Yahweh announced from the time of Moses' calling on Mount Sinai back in chapter 4, he had said that the plagues will culminate with the death of Pharaoh's son. You remember what he said in chapter 4 and verses 22 to 23. Then you shall say to Pharaoh, thus says Yahweh, Israel is my firstborn son. And I say to you, let my son go that he may serve me. And if you refuse to let him go, behold, I will kill your firstborn son. So that's where this is all headed. If that's the case, then why go through 10 plagues? And probably there's a number of reasons why 10. First of all, 10 is a nice whole number, right? We have a decimal system. And actually the Egyptians and the Israelites, they used a number system based on 10 as well. So it works out very well. 10 is a nice, complete whole number. It's the same reason, probably, that there are 10 commandments. For the same reason. It's a good number to remember. And it's not so many that you can't remember. More than that, it's not so few that it's super easy to remember either. Also, 10 is a pretty convincing number. As a whole, as a complete number, it makes a convincing argument as to the power of Yahweh over all things. Could Yahweh have convinced Pharaoh in 6 or 8 plagues? Probably. But again, 10 provides a nice, complete, convincing argument of the greatness of the one true God, Yahweh. And you may have heard this, some people suggest that there are 10 plagues because they are attacks on specific Egyptian gods. Now, certainly Yahweh says in Exodus 12:12 that he was executing judgment on the gods of Egypt. That's certainly true. But I don't think that means that each plague was against a certain Egyptian god. Rather, generally speaking, all of the plagues together demonstrate that Yahweh is judging the Egyptian gods, showing that they are nothing, showing that they are unable to save Egypt from the one true God, Yahweh. We run into troubles trying to identify each plague with a certain god, first of all, because there's more than 10 plagues, and there are 10 gods in the Egyptian pantheon. There are lots and lots of gods. So it doesn't quite work out that well. And to be honest with you, some of the plagues don't really match up very well with any of the particular gods. And so we end up really trying to make stuff work that just doesn't seem to naturally work. It's better to understand that, generally speaking, God is judging the Egyptian gods. Yahweh is demonstrating that he is the all-powerful God. Who is Yahweh? Well, through the plagues, we see that he is the one true God. And this brings up the important issue of the sovereignty of Yahweh. This is something that we discussed before when we were talking about Pharaoh's hard heart. But as we now consider the 10 plagues, and even the opening sign in chapter 7 before the first plague, from that moment, what we begin to see is the demonstration of the sovereignty of Yahweh. Yahweh is in control. If we learn nothing else from the 10 plagues, we learn that Yahweh is in control. One Jewish commentator put it this way. He said, the controlling purpose of the plagues is to emphasize the idea that the plagues are not random acts of nature. Although they are natural disasters, they are the deliberate and purposeful act of divine will. Their intent being retributive, coercive, and educative. As God's judgments on Egypt for the enslavement of the Israelites, they are meant to crush Pharaoh's resistance to their liberation. They are to demonstrate to Egypt the impotence of their gods, and by contrast, the incomparability of Yahweh, God of Israel, as the one supreme sovereign God of creation, who uses the phenomena of the natural order for his own purposes. Yahweh is the sovereign. Yahweh is in control. Pharaoh has been acting this whole time as though he is accountable to no one and to nothing, as though he himself were God. And yet the plagues demonstrate that Yahweh is in control. The 10 plagues themselves are structured very carefully. Last week we talked a little bit about how individual stories work within the larger story of the book of Exodus. Well, the individual story of the plagues is actually a very long story. It begins in chapter 7 and verse number 8, where we left off last week, and it goes all the way until the end of chapter 10 and the conclusion of the 9th plague. The 10th plague is actually its own separate story, and we'll get to that in a few weeks. So, what we have in front of us is this story of the Exodus in the form of an opening sign. You remember Aaron's rod turns to a snake and then eats up the magician's snakes or rods. We'll look at that in a moment. Then we have 9 plagues, and then we have a closing plague, a closing sign, the 10th plague. And so we kind of have this introduction, and then 9 plagues, and then a conclusion, a 1-9-1 sort of structure. Moses is really careful in laying that out. Not only that, but those 9 plagues themselves, from number 1 until number 9, they are grouped into 3 groups of 3. This is all rather fascinating, and it's you see this mainly in that the first plague of each group. So the first plague, the 4th plague, and the 7th plague, they all have a purpose statement in them. Yahweh says, "By this you will know." A clear purpose statement. You don't find that in any of the other plagues. It's in the first of each section, in the first, in the 4th, and in the 7th. And so this is Moses intentionally showing us the structure of the story, so we remember the story, well. It's also interesting, in each group, in the first plague of each group, Moses encounters Pharaoh early in the morning, the text says, as Pharaoh is going down to the river. So that would be in the 1st, in the 4th, and the 7th, each time. It's the same all the way through. And then in the 2nd of each group, so in the second plague, in the 5th plague, in the 8th plague, Moses meets Pharaoh in the palace. Not outside, not going down the river, but in the palace. And then the 3rd plague of each group, so number 3, number 6, and number 9, there's no meeting with Pharaoh at all. It's just a sudden plague that God brings because the previous plague was not listened in Pharaoh hardened his heart. So there's a very clear structure. Moses is doing something important in grouping this all together and drawing our attention to these different parts of the story. This is all ways that we can remember the story more vividly. Not only is it a way to remember more vividly what's going on, but God is doing something intentional in these 3 groups, and even in the progression in the 3 groups. In other words, these aren't just haphazard acts of nature. Sometimes, in order to make the Bible seem believable, some people will say that these plagues were basically just super-duper acts of nature. It was a really strong storm year, and so all this stuff just kind of naturally happened through the course of a year. Well, actually, the way that the story is told is to draw attention to the fact that that can't be the case. God is doing something supernatural here. Yeah, these are all acts of nature, but these are all way out of proportion for natural occurrences. The whole river of Nile does not turn to blood. The land doesn't naturally just get covered with frogs. The land, gnats don't just come out of the dust. This is God working in nature. This is God acting. The three groups of plagues all grow in intensity. The first three plagues that we're going to look at this morning, they're nuisance plagues. They don't actually endanger anyone's life or health. They're just a nuisance. The next three plagues are all significantly more dangerous. There is a matter of destruction in each of the next three plagues. And the final three plagues are even more destructive to the point of death. It's interesting because the last plague, the ninth plague, before the Pharaoh's firstborn son dying, this last plague of darkness is as if the whole Egyptian world is being uncreated and going back to that moment before God said, "Let there be light." And God is just bringing destruction on the natural world of Egypt. So these plagues, as they're building in intensity, they don't culminate. The point is not the ninth plague. The point isn't even the 10th plague. These are all culminating to the deliverance of the people of Yahweh. That's the point. That's where this is all going. This is the point of the careful structure of the 10 plagues, the liberty of Egypt, or of Israel from Egypt. So, God is showing his sovereignty over the nation. That's where all this is going. God is showing that he is sovereign over Egypt, over Pharaoh, even over the created order. So that's the big idea. Now that we kind of have a general idea of how this all works, we need to take a look at the introduction and then the first three plagues and see how is God showing his sovereignty in these first three plagues. Read with me verses 8 through 13 of chapter 7. And in this we have it's sort of like an opening shot, a shot over the bow of Pharaoh, if you will. Chapter 7, verses 8 through 13. Then Yahweh said to Moses and Aaron, "When Pharaoh says to you, 'Prove yourself by working a miracle,' then you shall say to Aaron, 'Take your staff and cast it down before Pharaoh, that it may become a serpent.'" So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and did just as Yahweh commanded. Aaron cast down his staff before Pharaoh and his servants, and it became a serpent. Then Pharaoh summoned the wise men and the sorcerers. And they, the magicians of Egypt, did also the same by their secret arts. For each man cast down his staff, and they became serpents. But Aaron's staff swallowed up their staffs. Still Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he would not listen to them, as Yahweh had said. So this is the first sign of the sovereignty of Yahweh. Again, the opening shot over the bow of Pharaoh. And what you actually see in this is the same structure that will pan out in all of the other plagues. Just like there's an overall structure to the plagues themselves, three groups of three plagues, there's actually within each story, there's a certain structure. Everything always starts with God saying to Moses, Yahweh said to Moses, Yahweh said to Moses. You read this every single time that a new plague starts this way. Yahweh said to Moses. And they also always end with Pharaoh hardening his heart. And in between there's also a regular kind of structure that we read the same kind of phrases through each account. There's certain details. Yahweh says to Moses, tell Aaron to do thus and such. And so Aaron goes and does thus and such. And in the first three plagues, and in this introduction, what we see is the magicians of Pharaoh are mentioned. And they're kind of like the foil, if you will. If you remember from high school lit class, you have the foil who's kind of like the antipart of the hero and shows all the strength of the hero. Well, God is kind of showing off his power against these magicians who are trying to imitate everything that God is doing here. Who is Yahweh? Well, at least judging by this first introduction, by the turning of the staff into a snake, Yahweh is the source behind Moses. Moses isn't speaking for himself. This sign of the staff turning into a snake, this is proof. This is an authentication that Moses doesn't speak for himself. He speaks for somebody else. Who is Yahweh? Yahweh is the power. Yahweh is the God behind Moses. Moses isn't speaking his own words. He is speaking for Pharaoh. Or for God, I'm sorry. He's speaking to Pharaoh for God. Now, does this prove that Yahweh is to be obeyed? Is Pharaoh convinced that this God, this authority behind Moses is someone that ought to be feared? Well, what we see is Pharaoh's heart was hardened and he would not listen to him as Yahweh had said. Notice, Pharaoh's magicians reproduced the sign of Moses. And yet, even though they reproduced that sign, Yahweh was still victorious. Aaron's rod swallowed up the rods of the magicians, right? God was already from the beginning showing himself more powerful than the Egyptians. God will win this conflict. It's almost a foreshadowing of what's going to happen. God will win. Yahweh will win. Even though Pharaoh may harden his heart, God will win. But sadly, Pharaoh is not convinced. He sees the sign, it's reproduced by his magicians, and so he hardens his heart. But notice that this is also just as Yahweh had said. Pharaoh's hard heart is not a surprise. It's not unexpected. Everything is going according to plan. And so the question still stands. Who is Yahweh? And this leads us to the first plague. Notice with me the account of the first plague from chapter 7, verse number 14, all the way down through verse number 25. The first plague. Then Yahweh said to Moses, Pharaoh's heart is hardened. He refuses to let the people go. Go to Pharaoh in the morning as he is going out to the water. Stand on the bank of the Nile to meet him, and take in your hand the staff that turned into a serpent. And you shall say to him, Yahweh, the God of the Hebrews, sent me to you, saying, let my people go, that they may serve me in the wilderness. But so far you have not obeyed. Thus says Yahweh, by this you shall know that I am Yahweh. Behold, with the staff that is in my hand, I will strike the water that is in the Nile, and it shall turn into blood. The fish in the Nile shall die, and the Nile will stink, and the Egyptians will grow weary of drinking the water of the Nile. And Yahweh said to Moses, say to Aaron, take your staff and stretch out your hand over the waters of Egypt, over their rivers, their canals, and their ponds, and all their pools of water, so that they may become blood. And there shall be blood throughout all the land of Egypt, even in vessels of wood and vessels of stone. Moses and Aaron did as Yahweh commanded. In the sight of Pharaoh and in the sight of his servants, he lifted up the staff and struck the water in the Nile. And all the water in the Nile turned into blood. And the fish in the Nile died, and the Nile stank, so that the Egyptians could not drink water from the Nile. There was blood throughout all the land of Egypt. But the magicians of Egypt did the same by their secret arts. So Pharaoh's heart remained hardened, and he would not listen to them, as Yahweh had said. Pharaoh turned and went into his house, and he did not even take this to heart. And all the Egyptians dug along the Nile for water to drink, for they could not drink the water of the Nile. 7 full days passed after Yahweh had struck the Nile. So, this is the beginning of the first series of plagues, the nuisance plagues, as I call them. Remember, the important thing that we noticed earlier, these are 3 sets of plagues, and the first plague in each set has a purpose statement in it. Who is Yahweh? Well, notice what Yahweh says in verse number 17. By this you shall know that I am Yahweh. Behold, with the staff that is in my hand, I will strike the water that is in the Nile, and it shall turn into blood. This is the purpose of the plagues, for Pharaoh to know who Yahweh is. And we see the importance of this question, who is Yahweh, even in the way that Moses speaks to Pharaoh. Notice again with me the way that he says verse 16. And you shall say to him, Yahweh, the God of the Hebrews, has sent me to you, saying, let my people go, that they may serve me in the wilderness. Notice, Moses does not say, let my people go. The people are not his people. He says, and he only says, and he always says, Yahweh says, let my people go. Moses is a messenger. Moses is a prophet. He doesn't speak his own word. He speaks the word of Yahweh. Pharaoh had complained back at the beginning. Chapter 5, I think we saw it. He didn't know who Yahweh is, the God of the Hebrews. And so, with this first plague, Yahweh declares very clearly the purpose of the plagues so that Pharaoh may know who Yahweh is. The Nile turning to blood tells Pharaoh. It tells Pharaoh, this sign tells Pharaoh, the God of the Hebrews is Yahweh. And he is the God over the water of the Nile. The Nile River, the lifeblood, so to speak, of the Egyptian culture, is contaminated and filthy. And Yahweh did that. But is Yahweh really to be obeyed? Verse 22, the magicians of Egypt did the same by their secret arts. So Pharaoh's heart remained hardened, and he would not listen to them, as Yahweh had said. If Pharaoh's magicians can do the same trick that Yahweh performed, then why should Pharaoh obey Yahweh? He must not be so powerful. And so we come to the second point. Notice with me, chapter 8, verses 1 to 15. Then Yahweh said to Moses, go in to Pharaoh and say to him, thus says Yahweh, let my people go, that they may serve me. But if you refuse to let them go, behold, I will plague all your country with frogs. The Nile shall swarm with frogs that shall come up into your house and into your bedroom and on your bed and into your house of your servants and your people and into your ovens and into your kneading bowls. The frogs shall come up on you and on your people and on all your servants. And Yahweh said to Moses, say to Aaron, stretch out your hand with your staff over the rivers, over the canals, and over the pools, and make frogs come up on the land of Egypt. So Aaron stretched out his hand over the waters of Egypt, and the frogs came up and covered the land of Egypt. But the magicians did the same by their secret arts, and made frogs come up on the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh called Moses and Aaron and said, plead with Yahweh to take away the frogs from me and from my people, and I will let the people go to sacrifice to Yahweh. Moses said to Pharaoh, be pleased to command me when I am to plead for you and for your servants and for your people, that the frogs be cut off from you and the houses and be left only in the Nile. And he said, tomorrow. Moses said, be it as you say, so that you may know that there is no one like Yahweh our God. The frogs shall go away from you and your house, and your servants, and your people. They shall be left only in the Nile. So Moses and Aaron went out from Pharaoh, and Moses cried out to Yahweh about the frogs, as he had agreed with Pharaoh. And Yahweh did, according to the word of Moses. The frogs died out in the houses, the courtyards, and the fields, and they gathered them together in heaps, and the land stank. But when Pharaoh saw that there was a respite, he hardened his heart and would not listen to them, as Yahweh had said. Who is Yahweh? Well, so far he is the Hebrew God who has power to turn a rod into a snake and a river into blood. But all this can also be done by the Egyptian magicians. So Yahweh is, at least not yet, a God really to be taken seriously. The second plague, however, increases the pressure on Pharaoh. The command hasn't changed. Yahweh said, let my people go. And if Pharaoh doesn't comply, frogs will come upon the land. Pharaoh, of course, does not comply, and consequently the plague comes upon the land. Notice how the land is infested. Moses uses a highly descriptive way to emphasize the disgusting nature of this infestation. You know, in this time period, beds were mats on the floor. They didn't have elevated beds like what we have. Also, there weren't kitchen cabinets. You know, we have our cabinets all above the stove and all that. They didn't have that in those days. They stored things on the floor. And so frogs get into everything, making everything dirty, contaminating everything. Is this enough? Yahweh is the God who is powerful enough to contaminate not only the river with blood, but also the land with frogs. Will Pharaoh relent? His magicians repeat the plague. somehow producing more frogs. Lovely, just what the land needs, right? This was no consolation to Pharaoh. Actually, Pharaoh seems at first glance to be convinced. He tells Moses to intercede on his behalf, that the frogs be taken away. And in return, Pharaoh promises to liberate Israel. Notice the word of Moses here. He says in verse number 9, "Be pleased to command me when I am to plead for you and for your servants and for your people, that the frogs be cut off from you and from your houses." The NIV renders it this way: "I leave to you the honor of setting the time for me to pray for you." That's a good translation. Moses' words are very respectful and very honoring to the king. That's the point. Pharaoh is no enemy of Moses necessarily. Moses harbors no ill will in his heart against the Pharaoh. Instead, his attitude is one of respect. Notice also why Moses is going to intercede for the Pharaoh. Did you catch it? "So that you may know," verse number 10, "that there is no one like Yahweh our God." That goes back to the purpose of the plagues, that Pharaoh may know. The point isn't to torture Pharaoh. Both the plague and relief from the plague are signs to Pharaoh that he may know that there is no one like Yahweh. But Pharaoh reneges on his way. He hardens his heart once more, and he refuses to let Israel go. The final plague of this first cycle, like the final plague of all three cycles, grants Pharaoh no warning. Notice with me what happens in verses 16 through 19. "Then Yahweh said to Moses, 'Say to Aaron, stretch out your staff and strike the dust of the earth, so that it may become gnats in all the land of Egypt.' And they did so. Aaron stretched out his hand with the staff and struck the dust of the earth. And there were gnats on man and beast. All the dust of the earth became gnats in all the land of Egypt. The magicians tried by their secret arts to produce gnats, but they could not. So there were gnats on man and beast. Then the magicians said to Pharaoh, 'This is the finger of God.' But Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he would not listen to them, as Yahweh had said." Who is Yahweh? He is the God who turned a rod into snake, contaminated the Nile River with blood, contaminated the Egyptian land with frogs, and now infests the air with gnats. These are little blood-sucking critters, something like a mosquito. I don't know how many of you guys like mosquitoes. We have more than enough down in the Amazon River. We slept in mosquito nets. If you sleep without a mosquito net, you will get bit up. And if you sleep up against your mosquito net, you'll also get bit up. Mosquitoes are not fun. Not fun. And the air is just full of them. Nothing is outside the control of Yahweh. What's more, the magicians tried by their secret arts to produce gnats, but they could not. The magicians had been bested. They can do no more. This is the climactic point of the first cycle. This is the finger of God, they said. Yahweh has demonstrated his power over Egypt, a power that not even the Egyptian magicians can replicate. Pharaoh wants to know, who is Yahweh? Yahweh is the God powerful over all of Egypt, from river to land to air. Nothing is outside of his control. His power cannot be equaled. His power cannot be duplicated. His power cannot be copied. It cannot be falsified. Yahweh is the powerful God. And yet Pharaoh will not listen. He continues in his stubbornness. There's some important points that we need to observe from this text, and what Moses, and greater than that, what God would have us to learn from this text. First of all, remember our question: who is Yahweh? Pharaoh is being shown exactly who this Yahweh is. Throughout this course of the first cycle of plagues, Pharaoh learns that Yahweh is the God who is sovereign over nature. No other Egyptian god possesses power like Yahweh. Yahweh is, in a sense, allowing himself to be tested by Pharaoh against the power of the false gods as they're represented by the magicians. And the plagues build and build and build until they can no longer be reproduced by these magicians. What's more, these magicians merely reproduce the signs and wonders. They do not, because they cannot, perform the harder task of undoing the miracle. They merely imitate it. And so Yahweh is demonstrated as the powerful God over creation. But here's the important part. Pharaoh had no motivation to be convinced by Moses of the identity of Yahweh. He was content to believe what he saw from his magicians. He was content to be deceived by his magicians. Though he asked the question, who is Yahweh? He demonstrated by his actions that he had no real intent. He had no real desire to learn the truth. He had no interest in accepting the authority of this God of the Hebrews. And so what we see in this text is not only the one true God revealing himself as the sovereign over creation, we also see the effort of man to try and not know the one true God. This reminds me of what someone once said. If one is predisposed to doubt God, one will always be attracted to natural explanations for all the Bible's supernatural phenomena, from creation to the resurrection of Jesus. And when we think about it this way, we realize that Pharaoh is not so different from many of the people that we meet today. Though Yahweh has revealed himself in the world around us, many people just frankly don't want to know who he is. Many people are in fact looking for reasons not to believe in him. What you seek, you will find. They find their reasons. But we see a little more about Yahweh than just his sovereign control over nature. You remember how the second plague ended. Did Yahweh know that Pharaoh would renege on his word? Of course. Did Moses know that Pharaoh would renege on his word? Probably. God had already told him from the beginning how all this was going to pan out. He knows that this is going to end with the 10th plague and not with the second. And yet, Moses still interceded for Pharaoh when Pharaoh begged him. In fact, Moses exalted Pharaoh at that very moment. What we see then in Yahweh is his patience and his mercy. He owed Pharaoh nothing. He didn't have to provide relief from the plague. Yet in his patience and in his mercy, he listened to Moses' prayer and provided relief for Pharaoh. This kind of patience and this kind of mercy is not just something that we see at this moment from Yahweh. This is actually something that is essential to the very nature and character of our God. You remember that Jesus came to show us the Father. He told Philip that in the upper room. And in Jesus, we see the patience of Yahweh. Listen to the way that Paul describes this same patience and mercy in Christ. Romans chapter 5. For while we were still weak, at the right time Christ died for the ungodly. For one will scarcely die for a righteous person, though perhaps for a good person one would even dare to die. But God shows his love for us, in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Since, therefore, we have now been justified by his blood, much more shall we be saved by him from the wrath of God. For if while we were enemies, we were reconciled to God by the death of his Son, much more, now that we are reconciled, shall we be saved by his life. More than that, we also rejoice in God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we now have received reconciliation. God didn't wait until we had made ourselves deserving of his patience and grace. He did not wait until we had made peace with him. We were his enemies when Christ died for us. God showed us his love in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. This is the same attribute of patience and mercy which Yahweh displayed to Pharaoh in answering Moses' intercessory prayer on behalf of Pharaoh for this relief that Yahweh showed Pharaoh and that Yahweh shows us through Christ. So when we look to God, when we ask the question, who is Yahweh, and we answer it by looking to this God, looking to the one who is in control over creation, he is that God. He is in control over nature. He is the one who is sovereign over the river and over the land and over the air. But we also look to him as the patient and the merciful God. The God who brings not only temporal relief, but eternal relief to his enemies, making peace with them and making them peaceful. This morning, we have the opportunity to celebrate together this work of God in making peace. This table, which is spread before us, is a means which God has given us to see the patience and the mercy of God. In this table, we see the gospel enacted before us as we eat the bread and drink the cup. And so we are, in a sense, now leaving the second millennium before Christ and coming back to the present circumstance. But we don't leave this God. We continue to look at the same God. We behold this same God who is rich in patience and mercy. As we pray, I want to ask the deacons if they would come up and help me as we prepare to celebrate the Lord's Supper. Father, we are so thankful for this patience and mercy which we see that you showed to Pharaoh while he was your enemy, that you have shown to us while we are your enemies. You have taken the initiative. You have always taken the initiative to make peace. We are so thankful. And we stand in the blood of Christ, redeemed. We stand in peace with you because you